Welcome to the Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this program, this live program in which, especially on this episode, which is Open Line First Monday, you are a very important part of the program. I know from emails and letters that a lot of you call or try and get your questions through and don't always get them through because there are so many people that are calling during this short hour. But this is the time for you to post your questions. And so our goal has always been to bring in on this first Monday either a returning guest or a Catholic apologist whose particular skills are prepared to answer your questions. Well, tonight I have both a returning guest and a very well-known Catholic apologist, Karl Keating. It's a great privilege to have Karl on the program because, Karl, well, first let me welcome you to Journey Home.
It's glad to be.
I'll turn my attention to you now because I wanted to tell the audience that in my journey into the Catholic Church, first of all, it was getting reacquainted with my good old classmate Scott Hahn that got kind of the first seed. But when I picked up his tape, that same time I picked up his tape, I picked up Catholicism and Fundamentalism. And I literally read that in one day.
And you became a Catholic anyway.
And I became a Catholic anyway. I still think, then 5 years later, when Mother Angelica invited me to do this program, I figured I better hone up on my apologetic skills. I got my well-annotated Catholicism Fundamentalism off the shelf and began reading it. And I tell you, I'm not just saying this because you're here, I still was so impressed by your writing skill in that book, the charity that book is done with in approaching both sides. And I just highly recommend Catholicism and Fundamentalism. Now you've gone on to write how many other books?
Another 4, so 5 altogether.
Okay.
My latest, Controversies, is just out recently.
All right. Yeah. In fact, a bookmark.
It's going to be a bookmark segment later on.
Great.
That's
so
right.
The audience should look forward to that. And you're the president of Catholic Answers. How long has that been in existence?
Well, full-time for me for 14 years, but it existed as a side venture for a number of years before that.
All right. Well, let's jump in as we always do because we want to get to the phone calls and emails as soon as we can. First, let's give the audience a little thumbnail sketch of your own spiritual journey.
First of all, I think I have to say that it may be a disappointment to some. I'm not a convert. I'm about the only Catholic apologist I know who's not a convert. I was brought up a Catholic from childhood, Chicago originally, then we moved to Southern California. Normal, average upbringing as a Catholic, went to public school, not parochial. But back in those days, even the public schools did not tend to undermine the faith. Did go to CCD classes and so on, learned the faith there.
You went through all the hoops, the usual conveyor belt.
The whole thing. Went off to college and never fell away from the church. Got a little lax in practice. Never missed Mass, but I do recollect that at one point it was a year between confessions. And probably a year where I needed to make more than the usual number rather than the fewer than usual. Then it was sometime later that I began to take an interest in the faith because I heard people question it, not necessarily antagonistically. And I knew that they were wrong, but I didn't know why. So I said, well, I need to know my own faith better. And it was very much an on-the-side thing. I started to read here, read that, pick up some scripture. When I was young, scripture wasn't something we read too much on our own. Right. We got a lot of it at church. So I knew what scripture said, but I didn't have much facility turning the pages. Not that I claim to now, but I think I know a little more now than I did when I was in college. And my interest was very slow. Some people say they've had some particular experience, religious experience that they can remember the date of, the time of perhaps. That never happened to me. It was a very slow maturation, and it's sort of up and down, up and down. And I guess at least that gave me a perspective that I know I've got a long ways to go.
But Garrigou-Lagrange, in his wonderful little book, 3 Ways of the Spiritual Life, talks about the necessity of multiple conversions. And
every day you need to convert, right? Every day you need to repent and turn to Christ and look at yourself. We call that the examination of conscience. Again, something that I still don't do every day, but I try to get closer to what I ought to be doing. It was relatively late in life that I got a spiritual director rather than just going to confession regularly, but had a spiritual director, and that helps. But I'm still a slowpoke in a lot of these things. But I don't have anything really remarkable to tell that here I stumbled on a text and everything was made clear. I always was a Catholic. I never doubted the faith. Newman's comment about 10,000 difficulties, not making one doubt. I never doubted the faith, but I had a lot of difficulties. I couldn't explain things to others or to myself, to my own satisfaction.
What was the spark that then eventually led to Catholic Answers?
I suppose if I were to say the remote apologetical act, the primal apologetical act, took place actually at the cathedral in San Diego. I went to confession and recited my sins to the priest and paused, waiting for his counsel and absolution. And he said to me, "Is that it?" I said, "Yes, Father, that's it." "Why are you wasting my time?" "Excuse me, Father? Why are you wasting my time? You didn't have any mortal sins to confess, and so you shouldn't be here. You can have your venial sins forgiven during the penitential rite at Mass or just by praying privately. But you don't need to come here unless you have mortal sins, so why are you wasting my time?" This riled me. This riled me. So I held my breath for a second. I leaned close to the screen. I said, "Father, I don't think you understand the theology of this sacrament. Let me explain it to you." Oops. Yeah, well, I was upset. And so I explained it to him that one need not have current mortal sins to go to confession, that a confession of devotion where you just confess your venial sins is not just acceptable, but desired.
Yes.
Well, that got me thinking that, well, first of all, I had to go to another priest to confess my anger. But then it got me thinking I needed to know more about the faith. And so I started to hit the books. And little by little, I found more books I wanted to read. And it got exciting. It got exciting because I no longer just saw myself as a 20th century American who happened to be a Catholic. But I had a connection, a historical connection to Christ through the church going back 2,000 years. And everything was coming alive.
You know, you say you didn't have a moment or a time in your own conversion, but now as I listen to you, what you just described was what Garrigou Lagrange would call as the second conversion. This hunger and thirsting for truth, a desire to know the faith, where before, one of many things,
Right.
now it becomes a higher on the list. I mean, that's
right.
that. And it just also shows, and it's encouragement to the audience, that God uses a great variety of things to get our attention. I mean, this, you might say, was not a very good confessional experience, but yet
No,
it was
that's true.
the thing that got your attention.
It did get my attention. And I've had other like situations in intervening years where, some of us need a kick in the pants once in a while to get moving on things. It's just so easy to fall back in sort of a self-satisfied mode in our faith. And some of us, myself particularly, are very prone to that.
Yeah.
And so when these little episodes come along,
Yeah. In the
Makes a
ways of
difference.
God, he who does not progress loses ground.
all right,
We're always called to be growing, converting every day. We've got to all be converts.
every day.
Every single one of us has to be a convert.
Because every time we fall into a sin, we've gone back on the path rather than forward. We've got to make that up and head further on. It's very much 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And sometimes, of course, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back.
You've been apologist now for many years, written books on that, spoken on it. You've been on EWTN many times. A question. Of all the folk you've worked with, what would you say of all the conversions that you've encountered, what would you say would be the 1 or 2 top conundrums for those outside the church looking in?
Oh, well, that's hard to say because there are so many individual problems. Certainly, a key for many people is the issue of authority. I deal, or have dealt, primarily with Protestant Christians. And most of them are coming to me with a presupposition that everything I need to know is in Scripture and on the surface of it. The sola scriptura position. And many of them begin to realize that there are problems with that. There's an insufficiency there. You find people of other faiths too. I mean, you have, for example, everyone's had a Mormon come to the door, and the Mormon wants to give you the Book of Mormon and asks you to read it. And what does he always say? Read it, and then ask God if it's true. And if it's true, he will give you what the Mormons call a burning in the bosom, an interior sense. The Mormons think that's very telling. It's convincing. But if you begin to tell them, if a Muslim comes up to you with the Quran and says the same thing, or
Yep.
anyone of any faith comes up with the Holy Book and asks the same question, does that mean if you feel something having read it, that that is true, and yet you're having contradictory faiths?
Especially down there in Southern California, where you could have had some real authentic Mexican food. I mean, that warming in the bosom
It depends.
might have been a burrito.
On what you ate rather than what you read. That's right. So you have that issue. But once you present it that way to people, say, okay, that burning in the bosom or the sola scriptura or whatever no longer satisfies. There's something more solid I need, and that's the issue of authority. Okay? On whom can I rely? You know, how do I know this is true? For a lot of my Protestant friends, it's because the minister said so. Ultimately, that's what it amounts to. And they come to see there's got to be something more.
Okay.
So I think authority is a big one.
It really is. And I know Father Ryland is a good friend of both of ours, has often said, really, when everything comes down to the issue of authority.
It really does.
I mean, you take the issue of purgatory. Okay, we got this opinion on purgatory and this opinion and this opinion. Well, how are you going to decide which of the 3, 4, 5 is true?
Right. And say infant baptism. That's a hot topic. You know, should infants be baptized or not? And if they are baptized, what, if anything, does baptism do to them? You've got Protestants on all sides of that issue.
Yeah. In fact, I've joked, I've never done a debate, and I probably will always stay away from them, but there's the debate I want to do. I will alone debate a Lutheran, a Baptist, and a Salvation Army
Well, that'd be an
on the
interesting
issue
debate.
of infant baptism.
Because you get 4 different opinions.
Yeah, and I'll just sit back and let them
That's right.
take each other on.
That's right.
Because that's, they would fight as much as they would fight with us as
That's
Catholics.
right. That's right.
All right, well, that's one of the many conundrums that stand in the way.
Right.
And is there a number 2 or?
I don't know if it's number 2. It's an important one, is the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And I found it often to be a good tool to use. I remember one time I was at home, lazy Saturday afternoon, lying on the couch, and 2 smartly dressed young women came to the door. I could see them through the screen door. There's a rap, and I looked up. I figured they were Avon ladies. And I said, yeah, what do you want? They said, we're witnesses of Jehovah, and we'd like to share with you some gospel truths. I was up like that. I went to the door, and my wife was just putting on an early supper, and I said, you go ahead and eat, I've got work to do. So I went out on the porch, and I found out right away that one of the witnesses had been a former Methodist, and the other a former Catholic. So you know which one I zeroed in on. And I said to her, let's use your translation of the Bible, the New World Translation, and let's look at John 6. That's the chapter where, after our Lord multiplies miraculously loaves and fish, he promises the Eucharist. It says, if there's to be spiritual life within you, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood. He repeats that. And so I go through that with them, verse by verse through that chapter. And then I get to verse 64 and I say, people here, just said before this, people left Christ because they would not accept this teaching. The only place in Scripture where anybody leaves Jesus for a doctrinal reason. This is a hard saying. Who can accept it? And they walked with him no more. And I turned to her and said, I got real close. I said, do you know who else fell away here? She said, no, who? She says, it was Judas. Judas falls away here. Later on, he becomes a thief, stealing from the common purse. Later on, he becomes a betrayer. But first, he betrays Jesus in his heart and his mind because he refuses Jesus' teaching. Yeah. And she said, is that so? I didn't know that was there.
That's right. That's one of those.
It's one of those light bulb things.
Yeah.
When you point it out to somebody, you say, it's been there all the time. I never saw it.
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the books I keep thinking I'm going to write. The verses I never saw, because there's a list of them that, as Protestants, we just jumped over, either because we had a quick solution or we didn't. We just ignored it, or we had a knee-jerk answer.
But there are a lot of Protestant churches though where you never really get to the verses anyway because the minister has his own favorite ones that he preaches from. Ronald Knox, who's one of our favorite writers, once commented that for most of Protestantism, it's 10% of Christianity that is soteriology, how you get saved.
Yeah.
Where most of the rest of Christianity is glided over or not looked at. So when you go to some of these churches, you've got the same half dozen verses over and over again. You never get to John 6.
Yeah.
And no one ever hears John 6 from the pulpit. And so I can understand why it's never made an impression.
That's right. In fact, I don't think I ever preached on it in my 10 years. Now, let's take the other side of this question as a Catholic apologist. In all areas of study, scholars are often looking for that one answer that will answer everything else. You know, the physicists are looking for the unified theory that will explain quantum mechanics and wave everything. Well, as an apologist, have you come up with the silver bullet, that one question that will cut to the heart of the issue?
Not so much one question, but let me put it this way, maybe one technique. That's turning to the fathers of the church. I found over and over again when either a Catholic or a Protestant starts to read the writings of the fathers, those who wrote in the first few centuries, they're both astounded that it's so obviously the Catholic faith that's being taught. It's so obvious. It's not an amorphous Christianity that somehow takes shape long after the Roman Empire is gone. It's from the first, second, third centuries already. A Catholic, when he reads the fathers, as I did, looks up and says, here's the evidence I need. I mean, it's all there. There's a kind of pat on the back, you know. Yeah, I'm in the right place. The Protestant, when he reads it, gets a shock because he finds that there's no early Luther, there's no early Calvin. They simply weren't there. These are bishops and popes and other saints writing about the Eucharist and confession and the other sacraments in almost modern terms.
As well as a hierarchical church?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's so. To me, as I mentioned in my first book, Catholicism and Fundamentalism, I was going to use, in that book, scripture, logic, drawing inferences, and the early history of the church. That is what you get out of the fathers, mainly. Those are enough for the non-Catholic reader. You know, in that book, I made a big point of not using as an authority any papal decree or any ecumenical council because a non-Catholic wouldn't accept them.
Right.
And I found since that book came out in 1988, that so many non-Catholic Christians have turned to the fathers of the church and just been astounded at what they found.
Especially I was impressed by the apostolic fathers particularly because those are the ones like
those are the
Clement,
earliest ones.
the earliest ones that you know have a direct connect to Ignatius, you know, the direct connect to the apostles.
They either themselves listened to the apostles or they were taught by someone who had.
That's right.
You know, so you're almost one generation removed.
And what happens is, you know, you have these different Christian groups that say that at some point very early everything got off base, you know, and so when you read those, you push it back so far that either the apostles themselves had to get off
That's
base.
right, because they must have gone, the church must have apostatized, as some say, while most of the apostles are still alive.
That's right.
Is that possible?
Yeah, especially
nobody
with
thinks
what
so.
Jesus promised.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that pushes back to even not being able to trust Jesus. Why don't we take our first caller? I think we're ready for this. Hello, Sam from Pennsylvania. What's your question for us?
Hello, Marcus and Mr. Keating. I have an acquaintance at work that we were discussing apologetics, and he said to me, I'm not going to apologize for my faith. And it struck me as odd, and then I started to wonder why we called this apologetics when it seems like we're learning how to defend and support our faith. So I was just wondering if you could mention that.
Thank you very much.
Fair question, Sam. You know, Marcus, sometimes I'll begin a public talk, especially when it's a mixed audience, by saying that I am an apologist, and I know some of you may not know what apologist means, so I'll explain to you. An apologist is somebody who goes around the country apologizing for being a Catholic. You know, and they get a chuckle, but then I go on to explain. The word comes from a Greek word, which means a defense or an explanation. So, to give an apology, in the older sense, is to explain or defend particular elements of the church using reason, primarily. So someone who does that is an apologist. In later centuries, the word apology came to indicate sorrow and repentance and so on. So we have a mixed meaning. In a way, I'd like to have another word for it, but no one's come up with one that really fits. So I think in a way we're sort of stuck, and we just have to educate ourselves to understand when we're using it one way and when we're using it another.
Yeah, probably maybe the verse of Scripture that most clearly defines what you're doing is that 1 Peter 3 passage, which says that always be prepared to make a defense
That's right.
to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you,
Exactly.
and do it with gentleness and reverence. I mean,
That's the hard part,
Yeah.
gentleness.
It's both sides of that are important.
That's
though.
right, that's right. We're obligated to give a defense, not just those who might be professional apologists, but every single Christian is obligated to give a defense, because every single Christian gets questioned at some point. You know, a family member, co-worker, what have you. And all that happens. But yes, Sam has a good point. It's been brought up before. I wish there were a better word, but it does give us
Yeah.
an opportunity sometimes to discuss apologetics.
Actually, it was a good question to start us off here. Let's take this email from Ruth Keith. Thank you for sending us this email, Ruth. This is Dear Marcus and Karl. My sister is an evangelical Lutheran. My family has converted to Catholicism, formerly Assembly of God / Church of Christ / Mormon. Boy, they've
Wow,
got,
what a combination.
Yeah, they got quite a background. My sister has said that Lutherans believe in the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but they are barred from communion in the Catholic Church because Catholics don't like Lutherans. What do Lutherans believe with regard to communion? I would like to respond diplomatically, but don't know how. Thank you very much, Ruth, for your question.
Well, Ruth, Lutherans and other Protestants are not barred from communion because of any personal dislike. I've met maybe one or two Lutherans that maybe I haven't cared for, but I have a lot of Lutheran friends.
Yeah.
That's not the reason. The reason is that although some Protestant denominations believe they have the real presence, they actually don't have the real presence. What you need is a real priesthood before you can have a real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And none of the Protestant churches has a valid priesthood. So canon law provides in section 844 for who it is that may go to communion. It begins, the first subparagraph is about a Catholic, and you have to be in a state of grace. Okay. Then the next one is about Eastern Orthodox churches. They have a valid priesthood, and therefore they have a valid sacrament, they're the real presence. An Eastern Orthodox person may take communion at a Catholic church whenever he wishes. Then you get to Protestants, although the term isn't used, but that's what's being referred to. And the canon law says that we're not able to offer them the ability to come up because they don't believe as we believe in the real presence of Christ. But we certainly encourage them to pray with us and to understand Catholic teaching.
And I would encourage the audience to sometime look at 1 Corinthians 11, verse, which one is that? 29? Is that what it is?
27?
27, whoever therefore eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord.
Yeah.
So what the Catholic Church is doing is a charitable thing.
I had the great privilege, 1994, I guess, to go to a private mass with the Holy Father at the Vatican. And we went through the bronze doors, the Swiss guards took us in, and a little side room that you wait in. And there were two American families there, both Protestant, from Chicago and from Dallas. And so they were going to be there with us. And as we went up the staircase, being taken up to the chapel, I asked them, have you been clued in about the protocol regarding communion? They said, no, what about it? I said, well, I just explained it, but I just explained here, so that you're not able to take communion in the Catholic Church. They said, well, thank you for telling us, because we didn't know that. We respect that. They didn't get upset. They were happy that they were made aware of Catholic regulations.
Okay, great. We might get more questions on that. We've got another caller waiting. This is Robert from Michigan. What's your question for us tonight?
Yes, thank you. I am a cradle Catholic, and I firmly believe in the truth and the teachings of the Church. I live in an area where we have a Christian radio station that I listen to quite a bit, but of course it is not a Catholic Christian radio station. And they have little 1 or 2 minute blurbs on there frequently about creation. It's the Institute for Creation Research.
Yeah.
And they talk about the literal Genesis account of a 6-day creation in a world thousands of years old. And I really am not certain what the Catholic Church's teaching is or how to respond to someone who makes that claim. Could you fill me in on what our belief or our teaching is?
First of all, I should note that the Catholic Answers office is about a 5-minute drive from the Institute of Creation Research's office.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
It is. That's right. That's right. So
I used to be a card-carrying member of them many years ago
right?
when I was more on the fundamentalist Protestant side.
well, the Church teaches, first of all, that God is the creator. He made out of nothing everything that exists, including empty space. And the Church says that there are different theories that are possible regarding how the human person came to be by way of his body. Augustine, for example, suggested that God may have taken and developed the body of a brute, a beast, and then infused a soul into it. That's 1,500 years ago now that he was writing. A Catholic is permitted to think that it's possible that the bodily evolution could happen, The church doesn't teach that it did, and doesn't say that it didn't. One thing that one must affirm is that God creates from nothing each individual human soul that begins at conception, and that the whole human race had first parents in Adam and Eve, that we're all descended from them, and that God created them in some way that we're not entirely sure of, because the biblical account in Genesis is cloaked in imagery to some extent. But Catholics must hold to that. Is it permissible for a Catholic to entirely disbelieve in evolution? Of course. Is it permissible to believe in certain kinds of evolution, that is what might be called theistic evolution, not atheistic evolution? And the answer is that's permissible too. Yeah. But the church doesn't hold to any particular scientific theory.
That's right. So that would rule out belief in spontaneous generation, right?
That's right.
It would rule out any belief in natural selection as the primary process by which all of this happened.
Basically, although I would think the argument against natural selection would be more of at the scientific level rather than a theological, of course. But you have to take into account certain basic elements the church teaches: Adam and Eve, God the creator of all. The human soul can't develop from matter, and it is distinct from matter. It is spirit. Spirit doesn't come from matter, so you've got to account for that, so on and so forth.
My guess is that the Catholic Answers website, as well as the EWTN website, has information on this very issue.
Exactly. You can go, of course, to EWTN.com or Catholic.com, which is the Catholic Answers website, and find a lot on the topic.
Yeah, because we certainly can't answer it all in this short time, but it kind of can at least scratch the surface. Why don't we take this next email before we go to our break. Ed from Mesa in Arizona. Marcus and Karl, thank you both so much for bringing me back home to the Catholic Church. My wife also converted this Easter from a fundamentalist background. My wife's parents, however, are bothered that the church is teaching on salvation. Specifically, that salvation, quote, could be given to Jews, Muslims, agnostics, and atheists if they respond positively to what they believe what is right, end of quote. How important is then baptism and faith in the church in Christ when others just have to do what is right in their mind? Thank you, Ed.
People often put it that way, that it makes no difference what you are. That's indifferentism. It does make a difference. I like to put it this way. For any one person, all else being equal, it's better to be a Christian than a non-Christian. Your chances of going to heaven are more. All things being equal for this one person, it's better to be a Catholic Christian than a non-Catholic Christian. Why? Because the Catholic Church has the fullness of religious truth and the sources of grace, the ordinary sources of grace being the sacraments. Okay. Our Protestant friends have much truth, but not the complete truth, and they only have 2 sacraments, okay, at most. People who aren't Christian would not have the sacraments at all and would be further from the truth. So for any one person, does that mean that all Catholics are going to go to heaven and all Hindus or Muslims or Jews or whoever don't have much chance? No. We have no way to measure the proportions will go. If we talk about a Catholic here and a non-Catholic here, we can't say which is going to heaven and which is not, because this could be a bad Catholic who ends up going to hell. This could be a good non-Christian who follows the lights. See, God wills the salvation of all, we're told, right? God wills the salvation of all. But what do you need to be saved? Grace. That means he's got to make available to everybody enough grace to get to heaven. Even if that means they don't realize his existence, or if they do, they don't properly understand what he is and who he is. Okay? But he somehow makes available to every person in the world enough grace to get saved. That doesn't mean the person definitely will be saved, but there's that opportunity to be saved.
You know, this reminds me on another issue. This is why Christ gave us the church, to help us answer these questions, because even as I'm hearing you give that explanation, I'm hearing my old Protestant voices saying, yeah, but this verse, or yeah, but this verse, you know, Romans 10, unless they hear, and how can they believe unless they hear, and how can they hear unless they preach? You know, but you take any one verse out and throw it at you, but that's why we need the church to establish what is true, to be the context for all these other verses.
That's right, because you take some of these verses out of isolation, and then ask, how can you square it that God wills the salvation of all? Are you saying that he's made it impossible for some to be saved? Then he doesn't will their salvation, if there's no way they can be saved. You get into conundrums of a different sort.
Yeah. especially if one believes in sola scriptura, you got to have the Bible. Well, there's an awful lot of people that have not only don't even have a Bible, but couldn't read it if they got one.
And even those who have the Bible, how do they know that this is the Bible they're supposed to have?
Yeah.
How do they know these books are the ones that make up the Bible, not some other set of books?
Yes, the issue of canon. We might get to that one later. We're going to take a break, come back just a second with your questions for Karl Keating. Welcome back to the Journey Home. My guest tonight is apologist Karl Keating, president of Catholic Answers, and author, speaker, and a glider pilot, right?
That's right, actually.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, what a rush, right? I mean, I can't imagine being up there without an engine.
A lot of people can't. But yeah, it's enjoyable. I think it was one of my midlife crisis things that I took it up. And I find it very relaxing at times. Actually, you can stay up quite a long time.
Is that right? Look, you're always looking for thermals, right?
You are, yes. And when you're not finding them, you're looking for places to land.
Okay. Let's take our first email in this half of the program. It comes from G. Fitzpatrick. He sends us very respectfully. Are there an exorbitant amount of reversions and conversions these days? I've never heard of so many conversion stories. When I was young, I would be attacked by anti-Catholics and berated for my faith. Now I'm asked to share my faith. Are there any pointers to help my friends along their journey? There's a lot in there.
There's a lot. I do think in recent years, within the last 20, there's been a real increase in the number of converts to the Catholic faith from non-Catholic Christianity in particular, but also from just indifferentism. People who had no religion and are turning towards the faith. The Holy Father, of course, has a big part in this, his example over his pontificate. But I think it's also a function of other things having been tried and people looking for a better answer. And they're beginning to see it in the Catholic Church. The last place they'd look, of course, but that's the way it works out. So I've seen it. Now, when I began my work in apologetics, close to 20 years ago now, there was more of an exodus from the Church. We had a lot of immigrants and not so many immigrants. Especially the case for Hispanics in this country. When I was a boy in Southern California, every person that you ran across, her surname, say Martinez or Garcia, was a Catholic. And he might not go to church, but if you asked him what his religion was, he'd say, I'm Catholic. It's not the case now. Because you see so many churches, it says Iglesia so-and-so, church in Spanish. Those are all evangelical or fundamentalist churches, and almost everybody in there used to be a Catholic. Okay. Well,
in fact, I had heard that some of those Protestant churches actually still use the Our Lady of Guadalupe
as a kind of hook.
As a kind of hook to pull.
That's right, yeah. But I see things turning a lot. If at one time we were losing tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of Catholics in this country every year to other forms of Christianity, I think we've at least reached a point of equilibrium. And we get more and more people coming in, fewer people leaving because they're finding teaching now at various levels, EWTN,
well, media all around.
Media,
the internet, book publishing, radio.
Lots of books now, sure. Catholic speakers all over the place.
Right.
So I see a trend. It's going in the right direction.
And it seems to me it's also unique. If you look historically, if you went back before 50 years, the majority of converts, especially educated converts, have been Anglican, Lutheran.
Right. You found a lot of big name converts then. I mean, Fulton Sheen made a lot of them. Okay. But you didn't find so many people, just regular folks in the pews. So
and now like in our database, we have people from over 60 different denominations.
Sure. They're from every place.
Yeah. That's really the fantastic thing about today's, the way the Spirit's working in people's hearts. Let's take our first caller for this part of the program. Mike from Texas, what's your question for us?
Yes, I'd like to thank you for allowing me on your program. I really enjoy the program.
Thanks, Mike.
I occasionally listen to what I'll call an expert on the Bible, who I affectionately call kind of like a Protestant Pope. I think Karl is probably familiar with him, and he is somewhat anti-Catholic. Is it worth trying to call and speak on a program like that, or better not to worry about that, even though sometimes it kind of burns you up? And be prepared for his objections with the people that you speak with around you. Thank you.
Well, Mike, I'd recommend that you call, because a lot of the other listeners are Catholics. And if they don't hear from you, if they don't get the Catholic point of view from you, they're not going to get it from the Pope you're talking about. I know who you mean. So I think it's good to call in. Now, you don't want to call in so much to argue with the host of the program. It's enough if you can get on the air and simply state the Catholic understanding. And you might preface it by saying, Mr. So-and-so, I think you misunderstand the Catholic teaching on this. Here's what it really is. And let it go like that. You don't have to be argumentative, but you get the truth out. And that's what counts. So I'd say call in and maybe even make it one of the speed number dials on your phone, so you get in there fast.
Because if you don't, it'll just be his choir.
Exactly.
Who will call and confirm what he's saying and back it up, and then when the Catholics are listening, well, if that guy said it and 7 other people called and stamped it, well, maybe there's some truth to it.
Well, look, I know those calls do quite a bit of good, because at Catholic Answers, we've actually got someone on staff who used to be a prominent staff member for the organization that he's referring to. And he's listening to the Catholics call in and made a difference in his faith.
All right. Let's take our next caller, Jean from Pennsylvania. What's your question for us?
Good evening, Marcus. Mr. Keating, I'm a teacher and a nurse, and at work we had a conversation the other day. A couple of the ladies who have elementary-age children posed the question, if Adam and Eve were the first parents and they had children, and to continue procreation, how did procreation continue? Did they marry their brothers and sisters? I said, ooh, that's a stumper, and I don't have the answer. I said, but I'd find out.
I was going to say,
there you go.
Thank you. I got that almost exact question this weekend at a father and son retreat. It was a young boy asked same question. It's a good question.
It's a good question.
It's there on their mind.
Sometimes it's phrased this way: who did Cain marry?
Yeah.
And the answer is Mrs. Cain, obviously. Well, in the first generations, yes, they married their close relatives. We're told that not only did Adam and Eve have Cain and Abel and Seth, but they had other children following who are not named. We don't know how many. But the men must have married their sisters at the beginning, and then as the human race was generated, they'd marry more and more distant relations until finally people were quite a few generations apart.
Yeah.
So in the early time, that must have been what happened.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of what about where they come from, in many ways the early genealogical accounts are kind of like if you and I were doing our genealogy. We would start with ourselves, and we would go to our father, and then our grandfather, and our great-grandfather, and all that. But in our list, we may not have our great-grandfather's brother and sister.
No. And also, going back, the ancients often would skip generations. So they'd say that A begat B. There might be 10 generations in between the two. But they're naming A and B because they're important people in the line. See? So we might see a dozen people listed, but that could go back hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, very good. All right, let's take our next email. It comes from Pat in Center Line, Michigan. Though I am not Catholic, but a practicing Lutheran, I watch your show and other EWTN shows frequently. I even contemplated becoming Catholic recently, but find some things go totally against my belief as a Christian. They are, 1, praying to Mary. Early when I asked the conundrums, that's one of the...
That's towards the top.
That's pretty top. Number 2, why is it that the Catholic Church feels it has the power to decide and vote on who becomes a saint? Thank you. And thank you, Pat, for your email.
Well, Pat, you're in a boat with a lot of other people. Because my experience is, I think, Marcus, you too, most Protestants who come toward the Catholic faith find their most difficulty with the Marian doctrines. They tend to be the tail end of the thing. You can get the rest.
We keep putting her off for a long time until we can't ignore her anymore. Right?
But sometimes I think it's useful if you look at what it is we're doing when we pray to Mary or any other saint. We're asking that person to pray to God for us, right? Now, Scripture already instructs us to pray for one another, to pray always and pray for one another here on earth. So, Marcus, if I were to ask you, would you pray to God for me because there's something on my heart? You're not going to turn to me and say, Karl, heck no, you pray to God straight. You're going to say, of course I will, because I'm commanded by Christ to pray for you while you pray to God straight. Okay. Now, heaven forbid, let's say you predecease me and you get to your appointed mansion up there.
Hopefully.
Are we no longer brothers in Christ? I'd say we're more perfected brothers in Christ. You've been perfected. I'm still down below. I can still ask you to intercede with God for me. I can ask you to pray to God on my behalf as I pray, right? Yeah. Okay. Because we believe, Catholics believe, in what we call the communion of saints. It doesn't stop at death. It continues and gets perfected in the afterlife. So if that's the case, it makes sense that we should be able to ask our friends who have gone before us to pray for us. And how do we communicate with them? Is through prayer. The other point I'd bring out, the verses in the book of Revelation that talk about the elders who are around the throne of the Lamb, and their robes have been washed white in the blood of the Lamb. So we know that they're dead Christians who've gone to heaven, right? And they have bowls of incense, and smoke goes up, and we're told the smoke from the incense is the prayers of the saints or Christians still on earth. How did these elders, what we today call saints in heaven, how did they get the prayers of the Christians on earth? They must have been prayed to by them to pass those prayers along to God. So it's right there in Scripture.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about one of the last conversations I had with my father was kind of on this issue in a sense that we had one of our few really intimate times talking about religion in my whole life with him. And one of the things I was able to say in terms of, because we knew it was getting close, and I would say, Dad, you know, that pretty soon you're going to know. See, we now see dimly as in a glass, but in a little bit, you're going to see face to face. So when we think about, just as you said, those that have now gone ahead of us, the reason we ask them to pray for us is they see it in a whole clear perspective than we do.
That's right.
You know, we might be praying, please pray that I get a Cadillac, and he's going to say, you don't need no Cadillac. That's right. You know, he knows how to pray better for us than we do ourselves. So, but also, as you were just saying that, you ask me to pray for you. I'm praying for you, but I'm still assuming that you're also praying.
Exactly.
I mean, you're not giving up your responsibility to a saint to do your work for you.
It's like when we go to confession. People say, why don't you ask God to forgive your sins? We do before we go in the confessional. That's called the act of contrition. See? But we also go to the appointed minister, the priest, because of the social aspect of sin. So we do both together.
Yep. Let's take our next caller. This is Raphael from Kansas. Hello, what's your question for us?
Yes, hi, good evening, Marcus. Great show. And Mr. Keating, I'm a big fan of your work.
Thanks very much.
My question is, how should a Catholic go about refuting the attacks, the false attacks on Pope Pius XII that's been, floating around? Where did it come from? And, how could we go about, turning that around there?
Any big bestseller books on that issue?
Well, Ron Richlack's book is a wonderful defense of Pius XII.
But I mean, also there are best-selling books against him,
against.
Sadly.
Oh, of course, yeah. This started mainly in the 60s with the play The Deputy by Rolf Hochhuth, a German playwright. And he there cast Pius XII as supposedly being indifferent to the plight of the Jews during World War II. Not at all the case. Factually, no one during the war did more than Pius XII to save Jewish lives. In fact, Pinchas Lapid, a Jewish Israeli historian, credited Pius XII with saving as many as 860,000 lives because of the instructions he gave the church, of his hiding Jews, not just in Rome, but elsewhere throughout war-torn Europe, many other things. Pius XII, at his death, was praised by Golda Meir, the future Prime Minister of Israel, as a great hero and defender of the Jewish people, and so on and so forth. But it wasn't until this play came out, and then nearer our own time, it was picked up again by certain anti-Catholics who simply don't have their facts right. Pius XII actually was a great hero during the war, and not at all someone who neglected his duties.
Okay, very good. Let's take our next caller. This is Ross from North Carolina. What's your question for us tonight?
Good evening to you both. I'm enjoying the program very much. I was particularly perked up in my ears when listening to the comments about the Apostolic Fathers and studying the Apostolic Fathers and how that's often a clear witness for people to the Catholic faith. Yeah. I had studied Catholicism for so many years and eventually ended up joining the Eastern Orthodox Church because I saw that same continuity and the historical witness from the Apostolic Fathers through the centuries being kept also in the Eastern Orthodox churches. So I was wondering if you could speak further on the connections between Eastern Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholic Church?
Thank you, Ross. Great question.
It is a great question. Many Catholics aren't very familiar with the Eastern Orthodox churches. Even fewer are familiar with the fact that we have Eastern rites within the Catholic Church.
That's right.
That are in union with Rome. And I think that's where we get the difference here. Father Ray Ryland, our mutual good friend, a few years ago in This Rock magazine, which I publish, had a series of articles on this very issue. And what he showed was that in the earliest centuries, in the eastern part of Christianity, what's now Eastern Europe and so on, those bishops there would turn to Rome and to the Pope to solve disputes that they had. They constantly were bickering among themselves, sometimes falling into heresy, but they would go for resolution to the Vicar of Christ. Eventually, though, in the latter part of the first millennium, there were a lot of political splits between the East and the West. And those political splits turned into religious splits, so that the Easterners no longer looked toward the Pope as the top authority in the church. And so it's true that they kept a great reverence for the fathers of the church. They've kept apostolic succession because they have valid bishops who ordained valid bishops and priests. So that's all there. But they've lost that core unity that they once enjoyed. And that's been now for a bit over a millennium that we've had this division. And I think Father Ryland did a very fine job.
Well, my question is when you can get Father Ryland to put those articles into a little book that we can.
That's right. And we'll arrange for that.
They're wonderful articles because they answer these very questions. I mean, that's coming from his conversion to the church. He's sensitive to those issues.
If you work backwards historically in the Eastern churches, you get to the point where they are under the authority of the Pope.
Yeah.
John Henry Newman, as a Protestant clergyman, was working backwards in the 1840s historically in Christianity, and ended up realizing that where he was an offshoot of the Catholic Church. And he became a Catholic because he saw that's where I came from, that's where I ought to be.
Do you have a favorite book, either in print or out, that you would recommend that would help folk see the Petrine authority in the early church in this issue? I know a couple of them that I know of, but do you have a favorite that you recommend?
Well, I would recommend Newman's essay on the development of doctrine.
It's not an easy book, but it's a good book.
Well, it's not easy. It's clearly written, and it's not all that long. But of course, Newman was the premier English stylist in the last couple of centuries, so that makes even a little heavier theology easy to go down.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take us next. Email Emily Dalton from St. Louis. Dear Karl, I've read lots of apologetics books and think I could handle myself in the discussion. I find, however, that situations rarely come up for me to share the faith. You see, the devil knows you know what you're talking about, so it keeps them away from you. Do you ever have this problem? Do you do anything to make these encounters happen more often?
Well, I have to say no. I tend to avoid encounters because they tend to come to me. But that's because maybe I have a little more of a public persona, Emily, than you do at this point. But what I would suggest is consider giving some introductory lectures on the Catholic faith at your parish and advertise it that you're inviting non-Catholics also to come. You might even put up an ad that I've thought of putting in our local paper when I might do something like this is Catholics need not apply. And then go in and just say, I'm really looking for non-Catholics to come in and understand the basics of the Catholic faith, but Catholics can come too if they bring a non-Catholic friend. Okay. And if you were to do that, I think you'd find in short order any number of people coming to you with questions that you can't handle in your talk because of time limitations, and it'll go from there.
All right, great. I want to bring you back to a question on Mary. We talked a bit about Mary, but she really is the conundrum for many at the last. They've been through everything else, and there's Mary. Why is that? Would you say in all your work with those outside the church, why is Mary such a barrier for them?
I think because for many of them they've been brought up in a kind of prejudice regarding Mary and the Catholic faith. What they've heard from the pulpit for generations often is that Catholics worship Mary or the other saints, and we know we shouldn't do that, right, because that would be idolatry. And therefore what's happened is that Mary has been minimized in their own understanding. Rarely is she looked at in Scripture, rarely is she discussed. Yeah. And so there's very little talk about Mary from those pulpits, but there's a lot of talk often against a misunderstood Catholic understanding of Mary. So you get that kind of dichotomy, which is powerful internally to a person. You know, when you were coming in, and you've told me this about other converts that you've worked with, you can intellectually accept what the Catholic Church teaches with respect to Mary, but for a long time there's still a kind of almost feeling of guilt that you're picking up a rosary or something.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there's something that lingers for a long time. And I think this is largely because primarily it's an English phenomenon. It comes out of the English Reformation, where there's a lot of anti-Catholic prejudice that was centered around Marian devotion. You know, Marian shrines all being taken down stone by stone, all that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of, in essence, anti-Marian thinking going on, which makes it hard for Americans who've, whatever their ethnic backgrounds, who've largely absorbed the British heritage.
I know when I was on the journey, I was so impressed by discovering how many verses in Scripture really addressed Mary all the way up through Revelation that I hadn't seen before. But one that just really got me, and that was in the Magnificat, when it says, "Henceforth all generations
shall call me blessed."
blessed."
And yet, if you read that, you said, some generations are not calling me anything. Okay, they're not calling me unblessed. They're just be quiet about me. Okay, that can't be right too.
Very interesting. Let's take this, probably our last caller, Charles from Mississippi. What's your question for us?
Good evening, gentlemen, Marcus and Carl. I'm not a Catholic, but I probably watch your program Journey Home more than a lot of Catholics do. I watch it every week.
Well, you're more than welcome.
And it's real interesting. My question is on the rapture. And all I want to ask is, I know, the interpretation is different.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, though, if y'all have ever thought, if it were to happen, I'm just saying if, not when, but if it were to happen, have y'all ever thought about what your reaction would be and the implications, at that time of it occurring? And I'll hang up and listen.
All right, thank you for your question.
Yeah, I'd have to say, Marcus, in my case, I haven't thought through that because I know it's not going to happen. Because the rapture is actually a modern invention. It came out of 19th century England. John Nelson Darby was a Plymouth Brethren who came up with the idea of dispensationalism, and the rapture is part of that. It's unknown to Christianity, even Protestantism, before that.
Yeah. In fact, most Protestants don't believe in that.
Most Protestants don't believe in it. None of the mainline Protestants and many evangelicals don't believe in it. So it's something that is so new and a kind of invention that I've never seriously, done the exercise of what if it were true. Yeah. Just as I don't do the exercise of what if there are little green men on Mars. Yeah. I don't worry about those things.
Yeah, and I respect the sincerity of our caller, because
sure,
when you don't know and you want to follow Jesus and Scriptures faithfully, that's what we want to do and understand. And there's an example that I knew. I remember when I read The Late Great Planet Earth back in the 70s, and I didn't have any other information, or I didn't have anyone else to check its reliability. And
sounded very convincing.
Sounded very convincing, and and then of course Hal Lindsey writes another book and another book and another book, when one of the prophecies doesn't come through. And after a while that becomes disconcerting. And the end of that, which I found sad, is that when you see a prophecy, it doesn't come through, you see a prophecy, doesn't come through, then pretty soon it does cause people the faith to get lost.
The whole faith can go.
Yeah. So, yeah. Or the idea of always pushing that something might happen is to keep some kind of power behind their faith, but in the end, we need to have just a strong faith in Jesus.
We shouldn't be looking for signs and wonders.
Church. That's great. How about any final comments to our audience, encouragement to our good folks?
Well, I'd say anyone can hit the books. As I said at the beginning of the show, the fathers are maybe the best way to go. Hit the books, read here, there, wherever you want. There's no particular plan you need to take. That's how I did it. And I think I learned enough about the faith to have a sense of confidence in it, and I've been able to help some others, I think, over the years. But if I could do it, anybody could do it.
You don't have to be an ex-lawyer to be an apologist, right?
No, matter of fact, being an ex-lawyer is probably a detriment.
Well, Karl, it is always a pleasure to be with you.
Marcus, glad to be with you.
It's sad that it's been a couple years since we've been together, but your witness has always been strong to me, and I appreciate that, and I know the audience does. So thank you very much for joining us on the journey home. And I also thank all of you who have joined us week after week, especially callers like the last one. We appreciate your questions, your sincerity in following Jesus Christ. Really that's what the journey home is all about, is our desire to follow Jesus faithfully and to trust that the church he gave us is a church that can be trusted to help us know what is true. And we ask the Spirit to guide us as we follow him, as we walk together. God bless you. See you again next week.